opinion, 1987 was a relatively strong year for GI Joe, as there were a good number of colorful and cool-looking characters introduced. We got Lieutenant Falcon, the Green Beret, who was prominently featured in the animated Joe movie, also released that year, voiced by Don Johnson and who was later revealed to be GI Joe poster boy Duke's half-brother. We also got another ninja, Jinx, who was trained by the Arashikage clan's Blind Master and was one of the newer characters introduced in 2013's live-action Retaliation movie, played by Elodie Young. There was also the explosive ordnance disposal specialist, Tunnel Rat, whose face likeness was famously modeled after the godfather of GI Joe, Larry Hama. And of course, we can't forget my namesake Joe, Mr. Christopher Levine, aka the MP Law and his loyal canine partner, Order. But when I first looked at the 1987 card back, there was one particular Joe that easily caught my attention above everyone else. Unfortunately, it was for the wrong reasons. Amidst all the cool-looking Joes was a guy proudly sporting a bright blue shirt with some pink splotches that initially I couldn't quite make out. Upon closer inspection, I realized that they were flowers? And to top it all off, his codename was Chuckles? Huh? As hard as I tried, I just couldn't wrap my head around this new Joe. What the hell was Chuckles supposed to be? Of course, I tried to rationalize his existence. I thought maybe the flowers on his shirt were some sort of exotic camouflage. He must be some sort of jungle warfare specialist. Maybe Chuckles meant that he was a nunchuck specialist. I know that was kind of a stretch, but hey, I was a kid. Back then, I had no idea what Hasbro was thinking when they created this guy, and it frustrated me to high heavens. Of course, ultimately, this didn't really deter me from getting his toy when I got the chance. Unfortunately though, even having the toy in hand didn't endear him to me any better. I did learn that his specialty was being an undercover agent, which I guess was cool, but it didn't really explain to me why he had pink flowers on his shirt, unless he was meant to go undercover exclusively at Hawaiian luau parties or something. Which I guess wasn't too far off the mark since, as an adult, I figured that his floral attire was most likely inspired by the popular 80s television character Magnum P.I., played by the actor Tom Selleck, who was a private investigator based in Hawaii and was known for his floral fashion. Anyway, flowers aside, Chuckles' action figure was rather light in the accessory department as well. All he had was a pistol and a strap-on holster. Granted, having a holster that could actually house his pistol was kinda cool. I could be wrong, but I think he was the first Joe figure to actually sport a functional holster. It just wasn't enough to keep me interested though, and he was soon a forgotten member of my Joe ranks. Years later though, Chuckles would get a bunch of modern updates. He was thrown in at the tail end of the 25th anniversary line in an exclusive multi-figure pack, and while his update mysteriously lacked the pink flowers, he still sported a bright blue shirt, this time with lush green leaves. We also got a Night Force version of Chuckles with further muted down colors. Thankfully, this version had a more standard issue military vest, but if you look close enough, you'll notice that his gray shirt underneath is still sporting some white flowers. To his credit, Chuckles was one of the handful of new Joes introduced in the 1987 animated movie. He belonged to a team of fresh recruits fittingly referred to as the Rawhides. Unfortunately, his undercover specialty was never utilized or even alluded to. In fact, he was curiously portrayed as a silent and almost Herculean strongman. He made his mark by displaying incredible, bordering on comical feats of physical strength, which included blowing up an oncoming his tank by literally picking up and throwing a missile by hand at it, successfully jump-starting a Tomahawk helicopter by getting on the roof and giving the huge rotor a spin. He also proceeded to stay on the roof of the copter with the rotor spinning inches above his head as it flew into battle, calmly shooting at enemy jets with his trusty pistol. Oh, and he also took out 3 dreadnoughts with one punch. Amazing. I guess you could say that he was actually operating undercover as He-Man. Anyway, while his character was portrayed a little more accurately to his file card specialty in the original Marvel comics, to be honest, there really wasn't much that would really make this character stand out in the minds of many fans, including myself. And it seemed that his ultimate fate would be to inevitably wilt away like the flowers in his shirt and be one in a long list of forgotten Joes. That is, until a Hail Mary play from comics company IDW catapulted Chuckles from obscurity into one of the most popular and, dare I say, iconic characters in the entire franchise. Best known for the grittier, more real-world take on the GI Joe franchise, in 2009, IDW launched a rather ambitious miniseries simply called Cobra. The premise was pretty straightforward. It would feature a Joe infiltrating Cobra initially as a lowly recruit and slowly working his way up the elite inner circle. What made this more interesting was that in the IDW universe, Cobra was a totally different animal. Instead of being the in-your-face villainous organization relying on contraptions like mass devices and weather dominators to take over the world, IDW's Cobra is an ultra-clandestine organization working in the shadows, destabilizing governments all over the world. As far as the general population was concerned, Cobra didn't exist, and to a highly specialized military and intelligence team like GI Joe, they were a whisper. A scary rumor, a dangerous mystery that needed to be cracked. So when selecting the Joe who would star in the series, writers Christos Gage and Mike Costa revealed in interviews that they wanted to stay away from the usual favorites like Snake Eyes, Scarlett, or Roadblock. Instead, they wanted to go with someone less known. In what would eventually become a common practice with this writing duo, they sought to get the lamest Joe character in existence and tried to make him cool. Going down the list of names, Chuckles immediately got their attention, and when they found out that his specialty just happened to be undercover, well, they knew they had their guy. Now before we go any further, I guess it goes without saying that we are now moving into spoiler territory. If you haven't read IDW's Cobra series and have plans to do so, turn back now. Instead, what you can do is subscribe to my channel and check out other stories from my Toyshelf. It would be much appreciated, and even if you do decide to push through with my condensed version of the Cobra story, don't let that stop you from subscribing either. And if you already have, thank you, and please spread the word. Anyway, back to Cobra. So as the story goes, Chuckles, already an undercover agent with a number of assignments under his belt, such as arms trafficking in Laos, working with the Taliban as well as Colombian drug lords, is given his latest mission by the head of GI Joe, General Hawk. As part of his cover, he is fired from the Joe team and even ends up taking out a couple of them in a staged raid in Russia in order to gain the trust of his Cobra recruiter. Eventually, he makes it in, with his only contact with the outside world being his handler and fellow Joe operative, Jinx, whom he eventually gets intimately involved with, and General Hawk himself. His main assignment being to infiltrate, observe, and report, using a very crude skeletal resonance receiver implanted in his skull, which basically enabled him to communicate using coded dot and dash messages. Chuckles eventually works his way up the ranks, doing stuff that, let's say, isn't up to par with what a real American hero would do, until he is assigned to work directly under an inner circle member, an individual named Mr. X, and is also introduced to his adjunct, a Miss Erica Leten, half-sister of the Baroness, whom he eventually gets intimately involved with. What can I say? The guy's a charmer. Anyway, the very bad things Chuckle does within the organization continue to escalate up until the point wherein his handler and lover, Jinx, is captured, and he is forced to murder her in cold blood in order to maintain his cover. Being forced to kill Jinx makes this mission extremely personal to Chuckles, and he vows to go the extra mile and take the whole Cobra operation down. In the last issue of the miniseries, Chuckles finally makes his move, confronting the mysterious Mr. X, who turns out to be two people, identical twins Tomax and Xamot Pauli, better known to Joe fans as the Crimson Twins or Crimson Guard Commanders. It is further revealed that they were aware of Chuckles' true allegiance very early on and were merely using him to make GI Joe think that they were successfully infiltrating and taking out strategic Cobra bases, which in reality were already redundant and decommissioned sites. Oh, and the Jinx test? Well, that was just the twins wanting to completely mess with him. Anyway, in the end, Chuckles manages to take down the current Crimson Twins Battalion Automation Tactics, or BATS operation, but both Tomax and Xamot escape. But not before Chuckles manages to give Xamot his famous facial scar that in all GI Joe media was the only physical differentiator from his twin. The series turned out to be a critically acclaimed hit that year, and to no one's surprise spawned the second miniseries to continue Chuckles' story. The second series picks up a year later with Hawk recruiting a new operative, Jinx lookalike, Chameleon, to find and retrieve Chuckles, who has gone missing since taking down the Crimson Twins' Bat operation. On the Cobra side, things have changed as well, as due to their loss to Chuckles, both Tomax and Xamot, and by association Erica Leten, had lost considerable favor with the true head snake Cobra Commander. Worse yet, the twins themselves, having previously been inseparable, have now splintered. Due to his near-death experience at the hands of Chuckles, Xamot had begun a downward spiral, exhibiting more reckless behavior and further weakening his and Tomax's position in the Cobra inner circle. Anyway, Chameleon eventually finds Chuckles in a remote Russian prison, where he is biding his time and working on a way to get back at the twins for the death of Jinx, and well, burn the entire Cobra operation down to the ground. He convinces Chameleon into giving him more time to gather more intelligence on Cobra. Despite his best efforts though, Cobra still sees Chuckles coming a mile away and basically sends in a squad of Vipers to kill him. Chuckles narrowly manages to defeat them, sustaining multiple injuries and ultimately being saved by Chameleon. He refuses to come back with Chameleon though, intent on finding his way to still take down Cobra. Figuring him a lost cause, Chameleon agrees and returns to Hawk with a technically more valuable asset, Erica Leten, who in an act of self-preservation defects to the side of the Joes. Alone and bleeding to death, Chuckles, with only one thing on his mind, slowly makes his way on foot through the wilderness towards the Cobra base. Unsurprisingly, he doesn't make it and collapses into unconsciousness, only to wake up hours later in a comfortable bed, wounds properly cleaned up, and in the presence of none other than Cobra Commander. And with that, ends the second miniseries. The final chapter of Chuckles' story is wrapped up in the now ongoing Cobra series, wherein Cobra Commander, who is mightily impressed with everything Chuckles has done up to this point, sets off to truly convert him into the Cobra side, as he jets him off to a secret base of operations in a nondescript island off the coast of Japan. And in an act of complete hubris, the commander offers Chuckles a high-ranking position next to him in his inner circle, carefully grooming him to eventually replace the increasingly unreliable and unpredictable Xamot, and by association Tomax, who he secretly offers up to Chuckles to kill as incentive when the time is right. As the series progresses, in a bid to be free from his Cobra shackles and master of his own fate, an increasingly unstable Xamot orchestrates a coup to take down the commander and conveniently lay the blame on Chuckles. But in the final act, Chuckles flips the script and manages to accomplish what no Joe has ever been able to do before: decorate the Cobra throne room walls with Cobra Commander's brain. And of course, blame it all on Xamot. In the end, with no place left to go, both Chuckles and Xamot end up inside a nuclear sub docked underneath the island. Xamot, of course, has every intention to use the sub to make his escape, and given that he is the only one capable of piloting said sub, assumes that Chuckles has no choice but to keep him alive. Unfortunately for Xamot though, Chuckles has other plans. Having killed the commander and avenged his lover Jinx, Chuckles is done, and then proceeds to detonate the nuclear sub, killing Xamot, himself, hundreds of Cobra operatives, and destroying a multi-billion-dollar Cobra installation. Mission accomplished. Or is it? In the aftermath, it is revealed that despite Chuckles' best effort, the Cobra organization survives and moves on. In a span of a mere 24 months, a new, more ruthless Cobra commander rises to the top and leads Cobra out of the shadows and into a full-blown military power and political influence on the world stage. It never ends, does it? Anyway, with the deepest respect, of course, to everything ever written by Larry Hama in the original Marvel run and beyond, I'm sure that I'm not the only fan out there who regards most of IDW's GI Joe run as one of the best ever written for the franchise, with ironically a series titled Cobra firmly on top. And of course, in the middle of it all is the Joe named Chuckles, handpicked for the series due to the absurdity of his name and the flowers on his shirt. Now, I can't confirm it, but I wouldn't be surprised if the original idea for Chuckles started out as a joke or a last-minute throw-in by Hama and company. But even if it was, I think it's safe to say that he's far outgrown his rather unspectacular origins, and as I said earlier, thanks to the excellent Cobra series, become one of the most popular Joes out there, with plans of a live-action movie heavily featuring him supposedly in the works. Although, after this debacle, I'm not quite sure that's ever gonna happen. But speaking of the Snake Eyes origin movie, I just want to say that this guy, Andrew Koji, the guy who played Storm Shadow, is awesome. And if you haven't yet, do yourself a favor and check out the series Warrior on Netflix. But back to Chuckles. Regardless of what you think of him or his sense of fashion, you can't deny that he is one of the best written and developed Joe characters of all time. Like I said, he may have started out as a joke, but at the end of the day, it looks like this guy definitely got the last laugh. Meet Larry, No, not that Larry. This one. Larry Hama, comic book writer, artist, and all-around Renaissance man who's been kicking it around the entertainment and publishing world since the swinging 60s. And if you've been a GI Joe fan since the 80s, you should already know who he is, and why so many consider him to be the godfather of the GI Joe, a real American hero franchise. But for the handful of you who've been living under a rock, let me fill you in. Back in the early 80s, when Hasbro teamed up with Marvel Comics to relaunch G.I. Joe for a brand new generation of kiddies, they needed someone to write the comic book. Oh, and also whip up individual character bios for each character in the line. I mean, given all these new toys weren't based on some generational movie franchise, they needed some way to tell their story. It was a big ask, especially for what was, at the time, just another toy line in a sea of toy lines. Not exactly the job of the century. In fact, Hama himself had said that the gig only came his way after every other writer at Marvel turned it down. So, yeah, expectations weren't exactly sky high. But instead of just phoning it in, Larry Hama rolled up his sleeves and built something legendary. From the jump, he treated G.I. Joe like it mattered. The comic was layered, smart, and surprisingly deep for what the execs still saw as just a glorified toy commercial. And even though Hasbro kept chucking new characters into the mix, spelling potential chaos for any writer trying to build a coherent story, Hama made it work. How? Because every Joe introduced came preloaded with a personality, thanks to those expertly written file cards, also by Hama. All of them. Yup. Every single one. Now, given all his contributions and how much he almost single-handedly rebuilt G.I. Joe from the ground up, you'd think Hasbro would have rolled out the red carpet and awarded Hama the proverbial keys to the city, or in this case, maybe the captain's chair of the USS Flag. But it was pretty much business as usual for Hama, who spent a good part of over a decade of his life creating his universe. To their credit though, Hasbro did find a unique way to honor him, and while they didn't go off and build him a giant statue, they did something similar, only smaller and more articulated. An action figure that just so happened to look a hella like him. Now, sure, these days having an action figure based on a real person isn't anything special. It's almost expected for any toy line coming from a big budget movie. I mean, only a few years ago, you could shoot over scans of your own face and a few bucks to get your very own action figure in the mail a few weeks later. But back then, getting your mug molded into plastic, well, that was a pretty big deal. So in 1987, we got this guy. Now, yeah, I know, this was long before the age of photorealistic face printing, and some uninformed cynic might scoff and say, it just has slightly slanted eyes. Couldn't that be any Asian? But whatever, even without digital scans, the card art for Little Nicky Lee, aka Tunnel Rat, definitely gave off strong young Larry Hama vibes. And if that wasn't enough, Tunnel Rat was listed as an Explosive Ordnance Disposal Specialist, or EOD for short, which, not so coincidentally, was Hama's real-life specialty during his 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. Quick random aside, EOD also happened to be the name of my college friend's all-female rock band. Though in their case, it stood for estrogen overdose. Still, they were pretty explosive on stage. Now, interestingly, while Hama himself is a third-generation Japanese-American, Tunnel Rat is canonically a unique blend of Trinidadian, Chinese, with a dash of Irish, Spanish, and Indian heritage thrown in for good measure. That said, he's usually portrayed in many iterations as Chinese-American from Brooklyn, compared to Hama, who's from Queens. I mean, same state, so close enough, right? I'm guessing that Hama, who must have been clearly honored by the tribute, didn't want it to be too on the nose. And while being codenamed after a rat might not sound all that flattering, it actually refers to a very specific and incredibly dangerous role in the military. Tunnel rats were the soldiers who crawled through underground enemy tunnel complexes on seek and destroy missions, often armed with nothing but a flashlight and a sidearm. These guys faced tight, pitch black, booby-trapped hellholes on a daily basis. They also had a tongue-in-cheek Latin motto that summed up their self-aware sense of humor: non gratum annus rodentum, roughly translated as not worth a rat's ass. It was self-deprecating, darkly funny, and the kind of gallows humor that helped soldiers deal with the sheer madness of the job. Because yeah, what they did was insane, but absolutely essential. Now, all that aside, as a kid, I was always a fan of Tunnel Rat's action figure. His overall look was just perfect in my opinion. An ammo belt slung across his chest, topped off with what looked like an old-school holstered silver pistol, long black pants, camo paint on his arms and face, and a bandana to top it all off. It wasn't quite standard military gear, but it still looked tough. Like a cross between a soldier and a pirate. And those slanted eyes, they made him look extra serious and kinda pissed off in the best way. His gear was also top tier. He came with a massive backpack with flashlights sticking out the top of each side, a rifle with a huge scope, and a man purse. Just kidding. It was probably a bag full of explosives. Still, looking back, with all that oversized equipment, it makes one wonder, how the hell was he supposed to crawl through tight enemy tunnels with all that? But hey, realism aside, the guy definitely looked cool. Anyway, Tunnel Rat didn't make quite the huge splash in the comics. Though he was there, he made his debut in issue 59 of the Marvel Comics, providing security for some fellow Joes field testing artillery, and showing the perks of his shiny new GI Joe credit card. Unfortunately, his credit card activity does tip off Cobra Commander, now sporting some shiny new battle armor, and his bird-loving buddy, Raptor. And what follows is a chaotic showdown involving trained Falcons and the dreaded Cobra Pogo Ballistic Battle Ball. In the end, the Joes narrowly escape the Pogo problem in the best way Tunnel Rat knows how, through a tunnel. Luckily, Tunnel Rat saw way more action in the animated world, starting with the 1987 GI Joe movie where he was introduced as one of the new recruits alongside a few more of his 87 wavemates, the MP Law and his dog Order, the blindfolded ninja Jinx, the f***up Falcon, the silent missile chucking Chuckles, and the basketball lobbing Big Lob. This rookie squad was dubbed the Rawhides by their rather grumpy drill sergeant, the masked ranger Beachhead. In the movie, Tunnel Rat was a cocky, gum-chewing, wisecracking little dude who instantly bonded with the much taller Big Lob. Basically, brothers from another mother. And together, they easily aced their training assignment of running through a booby-trapped obstacle course to ring a bell on the other side. And while Big Lob takes the arguably longer route, weaving and bobbing through firewalls and explosions, electric-charged barbed wire, and laser fire, Tunnel Rat conveniently finds a tunnel, which safely leads him to the other side where both guys successfully ring the bell. And speaking of bells, if you're enjoying this story, why not go ahead and click the notification bell and sub to my channel so you don't miss out on more deep dives like this one. And hey, if your clicking finger is still feeling twitchy, please give this video a like and share with a friend. As always, any help would be very much appreciated, so thank you. Anyway, towards the end of the movie, Tunnel Rat gets a pretty pivotal moment when he leads the Joes straight into Cobra Law for the final battle. Through the back door, of course. Yup, another tunnel. And after easily taking out a few dreadnoughts, I mean, when you got a guy who can take out 3 knocks with one punch, easy peasy. And during the battle, Tunnel Rat gets a rather memorable action sequence when he is swallowed whole by a massive worm-like creature, which, let's be honest, also kind of is a tunnel. So no problemo for the rat who blasts his way out from the inside and runs off laughing like a madman. Even as a kid, I remember thinking, yeah, this dude might just be a little off. Sadly, that version of Tunnel Rat and the rest of the Renegades were shelved after the movie as there were no more new episodes of the cartoon that followed. We do not talk about Dick. But unlike some of his Rawhide teammates, Tunnel Rat would make a comeback, multiple times actually, in later modern iterations of GI Joe. First up, GI Joe Sigma 6 in 2005. Now this version of Tunnel Rat had a rather different and new anime-inspired redesign and was part of the core team as their infiltration and demolitions expert. And while his OG buddy Big Lob was nowhere in sight, Tunnel Rat did get a new bestie in the form of the powerhouse Heavy Duty. Anyway, completely stylized anime look aside, this Tunnel Rat was one weird dude, often depicted as lazy and, well, snacking on bugs. Then came GI Joe Resolute in 2009, which was a much more mature, gritty, as in let's actually kill off some Joes and Cobras, take on the franchise. Tunnel Rat shows up in a big way, literally going outside of his element, up to the skies, leading a strike team into the stratosphere to take out Cobra's high-altitude stratolights, which are needed to power their latest weapon of mass destruction. After nearly getting taken out by falling debris, he manages to overload the entire network with a power surge, wiping out Cobra's global system in one go as he successfully parachutes back down to Earth. With his entire team. Apparently, I got a lot of flack from viewers when I said a couple of his team fell to their deaths in a previous video. I mean, in my defense, they were knocked down by debris ages prior, so it didn't really make sense that they parachuted back to Earth at the same time as Tunnel Rat, but okay, whatever. They live. So, good job, Tunnel Rat. The following year, Tunnel Rat returned, and once again as a main character in GI Joe Renegades. This series gave us a fresh spin on the team, reimagining the Joes as fugitives on the run from the military for crimes they didn't commit. Okay, I said fresh for GI Joe. Let's not talk about that other team. Tunnel Rat joins up with a younger Duke, Scarlett, and a new big buddy, Roadblock. I'm starting to sense a trend here with Tunnel Rat and all his larger best friends. Now, while hiding in tunnels obviously would come in handy for fugitives on the move, this version of Tunnel Rat brought even more to the table as a team's medic, even if he didn't exactly look like one. But hey, what do I know? Before going off the grid, this guy was apparently on a unit with snow job and frostbite, so yeah, anything goes. Besides, everyone needs a medic, right? Well, except apparently the Saw Viper. If you know, you know. So yeah, Tunnel Rat definitely carved out a name for himself in the 2000s, and with increased screen time, naturally came more toys. And with that being said, let's go over them, shall we? And let's start from the very beginning. Now, I've already covered Tunnel Rat's original 1987 figure, and while he didn't have any more newly sculpted versions before the Real American Hero line ended in 1994, Hasbro definitely made the most of that original mold, re-releasing it a good number of times with new paint. First, there was a darker repaint in 1988 as part of Night Force. Then in 1990, he showed up as part of the Sonic Fighters, sporting a maroon outfit and an even bigger backpack with buttons that gave off sonic sounds. And finally, a tiger-themed one. Okay, a tiger-themed bandana-wearing one in 1991 as part of, well, Tiger Force, although this one was a rare European exclusive. And thanks to his prominent roles in Sigma 6 and Renegades, both those versions of Tunnel Rat got immortalized in plastic as well. Unfortunately, the Resolute version, arguably the coolest modern take of Tunnel Rat in my opinion, got nothing. I fixed that glaring omission by crafting my own custom of the guy. And no, this doesn't count. It's just the OG version of Tunnel Rat done for the updated 25th anniversary line, which in itself is a pretty decent modern take. Although, I think they overdid it on the eye slants on this one, and unfortunately, he doesn't come with his signature backpack and flashlights. Tunnel Rat then got a figure for the Rise of Cobra toy line, even if he didn't appear in the live-action movie. But basically, this was just a line stuffer, the same 25th anniversary figure painted up in Night Force colors. Years later, this OG and Night Force color tandem would also be replicated in 6-inch form, with both versions of Tunnel Rat being fairly early releases in the GI Joe Classified line. Nothing extra fancy here, just amped up versions of the original classic Tunnel Rat design, but this time around coming equipped with a pair of nifty night vision goggles, which I'm sure definitely comes in handy when going through all those deep, dark tunnels. That being said, hopefully we won't have to wait too long for his OG buddy, Big Lob, to join Tunnel Rat in the line. In 1987, the first full-length GI Joe animated movie was released to video. Just like the animated Transformers movie that came out a year earlier, one of the main objectives that this movie had was to introduce new characters based on the toys released that year. Cobra's backstory was also expanded upon with the introduction of Cobra la 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 Secret Empire, and the Joes ranks were bolstered by the addition of some new recruits, collectively known as the Rawhides. The Rawhides consisted of 6 Joes, 5 of whom were part of the 1987 toy line. We got the Green Beret Falcon, Military Police Law and his canine companion Order, Covert Ops Agent Chuckles, the ninja Jinx, and finally Explosive Ordnance Disposal Specialist Tunnel Rat. The sixth member was a grenadier named Big Lob, who didn't get an action figure and seemed to be created solely for the movie. Big Lob's omission from the toy line was quite puzzling, at least to me, because he was easily one of the more memorable new characters from the movie. Big Lob literally stood taller than most of his fellow Rawhides, especially Tunnel Rat, with whom he was often paired with. He also spoke like a sports commentator, likening battlefield situations to a basketball game, calling out all his moves and referring to himself in the third person. And to complete the whole gimmick, instead of using a grenade launcher, he literally lobbed his grenades towards their intended targets, as if he was shooting basketballs. Considering that his name was probably mentioned the most in the movie, for some reason I couldn't figure out exactly what his codename was. Since I wasn't really into basketball at the time, I didn't really know what a lob was. So I kept thinking his name was Big Love, which I thought was a rather stupid name. Unfortunately, once the movie was done, Big Lob was pretty much forgotten along with the rest of the Rawhides. The third season of the cartoon series, which the movie was supposed to set up, never happened as the original animation company, Sunbow, lost the Joe license to another studio, DiC. And when DiC's new series premiered, their focus had shifted to the next batch of new Joe toys released. One thing worth mentioning though is that while a Big Lob figure was not part of the 1987 toy lineup, there actually was another sports-based Joe that was. The Joe named Hardball was introduced along with the rest of the Rawhides that year. Instead of basketball though, Hardball's sport was baseball. Now maybe it was just pure coincidence, but the whole sports plus soldier gimmick wasn't the only similarity these two Joes shared. First, they were both African American, and secondly, they shared the same weapon specialty, which was that of a grenadier. The only difference being Hardball actually used a multi-shot grenade launcher. And finally, as if to drive their connection home, according to Joepedia, one of the working names Hasbro had before settling on Hardball was Lob Shot. While as far as I know this was never actually confirmed, given all these similarities between the two Joes, I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to conclude that they were actually meant to be the same character. It's quite possible that the producers of the movie thought that the whole baseball theme might not be as catchy, so they switched it up and came up with Big Lob. Who knows? But one thing is for certain for me, I would have much rather gotten a Big Lob action figure over Hardball back in 1987. For years, Big Lob had been a gaping hole in many fans' collection, especially since we got the rest of the Rawhides in both the vintage and modern toy lines. In order to complete my modern lineup, I resorted to making my own custom Big Lob. Looking back, this was a rather memorable project for me, as it was the first custom I did that involved actual sculpting to give him his unique afro hairstyle. For a first-time sculpt, I think I did a pretty decent job. Unfortunately, the same couldn't be said for the jersey number, which required a rather skilled and steady hand to paint, something I didn't have. Well, I did my best and the end result was in my books good enough. Anyway, to complete the circle, a few months later I would add a custom hardball to my collection as well. This, I think, turned out a little bit better. Anyway, in 2010, a full 13 years after the rest of the team was released, the official GI Joe Collectors Club finally produced the first ever Big Lob toy. Unfortunately for me, the figure release was done in the vintage style. Being a modern collector, I really had no need for it. It was nice though to finally see him get an action figure. If anything, at least he finally got an official file card, which gave us a better idea of who he was. To explain his absence in any other GI Joe media post-1987, Big Lob is simply listed as a reservist, which allowed him the flexibility to only report for missions needing his specialized skill set. And since the Joes didn't regularly participate in any basketball shootouts with Cobra, he was rarely called into action. I kid. But seriously though, another thing firmly established with his file card was that Big Lob was officially his own Joe. While he may have been created as a way to make Hardball's character a little bit more interesting for the movie, moving forward, they would now be two unique members of the Joe team. Big Lob's civilian name was Bradley J. Sanders, as a nod to his voice actor in the movie, Brad Sanders. Now allow me to tell you more of Big Lob's story, as told in his file card. Big Lob's outstanding physical prowess made him an athletic standout since elementary school. During high school, his strength, conditioning, speed, and all-around toughness helped him excel in 6 different sports. With college scholarships lined up upon graduation, he chose to enlist in the Army Reserves to serve his country but still stay close to his hometown and family. Rumors of his outstanding sports prowess and record of precise distance grenade throwing were quickly recognized by the GI Joe team. He joined under their Rawhides program, which allowed him the flexibility to only report for missions needing his specialized expertise. He is well liked by his teammates except for his annoying habit of talking about himself in the third person and using sports metaphors on every subject. The concept of throwing grenades goes back to the Greek fire used by the Byzantines and early gunpowder bombs devised by the Chinese in the Tang Dynasty. 13 centuries later, more advanced and specialized versions are still an integral part of the modern soldier's ordnance. Big Lob is exceptionally skilled at manually throwing hand grenades at specified targets and using his multi-shot grenade launcher for longer distances. He carries a full arsenal of high explosive, flechette, incendiary, chemical compounds, and even smoke grenades to accomplish any mission objective. It would take another 7 years for me to finally get the Big Lob figure I wanted. Once again, it was the Collectors Club to the rescue with a modern action figure of Big Lob. Interestingly enough, this new version of Big Lob looks significantly ripped compared to his original lanky animation model. That's because the club reused existing parts from a previous figure of Roadblock from the 2013 live-action movie GI Joe Retaliation. In the movie, Roadblock was played by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, which would explain Big Lob's new bulging physique. Anyway, with my modern version of Big Lob in hand, I finally have a complete official Rawhides lineup for my shelf. And that would basically cover all I have to say about Big Lob. So, was I the only one out there waiting on bated breath for a Big Lob action figure? Let me know in the comments below. Come on, give me some love. Are you familiar with the story of Hachiko? He was a dog in 1920s Japan who walked his owner to the train station every morning, then came back every afternoon to wait for him. One day, the owner didn't come back. He unfortunately died of a heart attack while he was away, but Hachiko, unaware of his master's fate, kept waiting every single day for 9 years until he died himself. That's not just loyalty, that's like next level ride or die. It's a heartbreaking story for sure, forever immortalized with an actual statue of Hachiko outside the Shibuya train station in Tokyo, serving as a reminder of what makes the bond between human and dog so legendary. It's something many people can relate to, including myself, who at the time is sharing the couch with my boy Bono while I type this script out. And given that special bond, it's no surprise that the dog handler Mutt and his boy Junkyard proved to be quite the popular pair in both toy form and cartoons ever since their release in 1984. And after a few years, Hasbro decided that it was just about the right time to throw in another real American doggo into the mix. Actually, he was German, but that's beside the point, alongside a new master, who this time came with a police badge. So the year was 1987, and at this point, I, along with my closest friends David, Gabe, and Javier, were all hardcore Joe collectors. That being said, there was one thing about this line that really bugged me, and that was, after 5 years and over 40 unique Joes released, not a single one of them was named after me. Chris. My friends all had Joes that had their names. There was the missile specialist David Katzenbogen, codenamed Bazooka, the firefighter Gabriel Kelly, codenamed Barbecue, and the sailor Shipwreck, who wasn't named Javier but shared the same last name of Delgado, which was good enough for him. But no Chris. And my friends, being the nice people that they were, would always rub it in and never make me forget that I had no Joe to call my own. But all that changed when Hasbro came up with a military police character codenamed Law and his dog, Order. Get it? The police, law, and order. That's pretty witty, Hasbro. I remember the moment I found out my long wait was over fondly, like it was yesterday. Javier called me up on the phone telling me the good news that there was finally a Joe named Chris. I wasted no time heading over to the #1 toy shop in my area back then called Nova Fontana and found him hanging behind the counter. Upon confirming that he was indeed named Chris, I eagerly forked over my money and he was all mine. I didn't really care that he sported a rather tacky-looking uniform. I mean, when was the last time you saw a military police officer in a bright red shirt topped off with a bright blue vest over a pair of olive green pants? That being said, all biases aside, he looked fantastic. A genius color combination choice, if I do say so myself. I mean, Law fit right in with the likes of a neon green psychologist, a flower powered undercover agent, and a paratrooper decked out in bright red to, make it easier for enemies to spot him against the blue sky as he parachuted into battle. The best part, however, was that my guy had something my friends Joe's didn't have: a dog. Eat that, barbecue bazooka and shipwreck. I mean, sorry, Polly, but dog trumps parrot any day. So there he was, MP Law, real name Christopher Levine, and his canine Order. Law's file card described an individual who acts as the defensive line for an elite unit like the Joes. The kind of guy that the bad guys are going to send the best they have against. Unfortunately for them, though, their best is not enough to get past Law and Order. You don't want to mess with him and that dog of his. Chew your leg right off, he will. And after that, you still have to deal with the dog. But as rough and tough as his file card made Law out to be, what we got in the 1987 full-length animated movie felt and sounded more like a chill and laid-back dude. I was also surprised by him being portrayed as Hispanic, which I did not see coming given his last name of Levine is of French origin, meaning the vine or the vineyard. I mean, the guy sounded like Cheech Marin from Cheech and Chong fame, which might sound like me stereotyping Hispanics, but come on, any guy who sniffs out bombs and lets the dog drive the car has got to be on something, if you know what I mean. But whatever, this was Law & Order's grand animated debut. So grand that they both even got a top-tier feature in the movie poster alongside the new lead character Falcon and heavy hitters like Sergeant Slaughter, Lady J, and Duke. If you ask me, this was all due to Order. I mean, who wouldn't want a dog on the poster? Seriously though, Law was introduced as one of the new recruits to the Joe team alongside fellow 87 wave mates Chuckles, Jinx, Tunnel Rat, the aforementioned Falcon, and a new guy seemingly made for the movie named Big Lob. Anyway, this bunch is given the nickname of the Rawhides by their rather grumpy drill instructor Beachhead, who immediately takes a liking to Law due to his military background. Unfortunately, the status of favorite is quickly taken back by Beachhead when he is introduced to the MP's Bow Wow Order, who during their special training exercise subjects the Masked Ranger to an impromptu game of fetch with a live bomb, which is eventually disposed of by Law, but a stressful ordeal nonetheless for Beachhead, who then wishes fleas on both of them. Anyway, after the movie, that was pretty much it for Law in the animated world, until years later when he would make a short but sweet appearance in the 2010 series Renegades. A fresh take on the Joes, now positioning the main team as a band of fugitives on the run from the military for crimes that they didn't commit. Okay, so maybe not that fresh. Anyway, I guess the plan was to have this show sort of be an origin story for the GI Joe team, as in almost every episode, that ragtag group of renegades would meet familiar characters like a sailor, a firefighter, and a snowtrooper who helped them along their way. So yeah, you can see where this was all supposed to lead, right? In the episode Busted, Duke is accidentally arrested during a chop shop bust and is taken to a prison run by a corrupt warden who secretly runs an underground fight club where he makes prisoners fight for the enjoyment of paying customers watching online. Anyway, Duke meets one of the newer officers named Levine and his dog, Order, who is obviously conflicted but feeling powerless to do anything. In the end, Duke manages to convince Levine to stand up and fight back, and along with the other renegades and a little help from Flint and the military, are able to successfully take down the corrupt warden and his entire Fight Club organization. I know it wasn't much of anything for Law but a glorified cameo, but like I said, the first season of Renegades seemed to be all about planting seeds for a future GI Joe team that would ultimately come into fruition in the second season, which we never got, as Renegades was given an unceremoniously early exit, cancelled after one season. And that was it for Law and his dog Order in the cartoons. Man, all this dog talk is reminding me of some of my other favorite animals. You know, cats, hawks, turtles. More specifically, Thundercats, Silverhawks, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I love talking about them too, but thanks to the algorithm gods, I mostly stick to Transformers and GI Joe on this channel, which is perfectly fine for me. But If you want to see extra content like toy reviews, collection tours on other toy properties without breaking the rhythm of my algo, if you know what I mean, why not try out my channel membership and become a friend of the Toyshelf, where you'll also get early access to my main videos. All you gotta do is just click on the join button on my homepage and give it a shot. No pressure and no lock-ins. And as always, liking, sharing, and subs will be extremely appreciated, so thank you. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot to dig into when it comes to Law & Order's comic appearances. They do show up in the original Marvel GI Joe A Real American Hero run, making their debut in issue number 60, where oddly enough, they kick things off by kidnapping General Hawk. But it's all part of a mission led by Chuckles, joined by fellow 87 recruits Fast Draw, Falcon, and of course, our favorite MP and his trusty K9. Together, they uncover an operation run by a rogue US government faction who plans to fire a missile straight into Cobra Island. And what follows is a chaotic showdown at an artificial beach resort in Miami, where the Joes and the Dreadnoks are ironically both trying to stop the missile, but somehow forgot to compare notes. In the end, the missile is launched but blown out of the sky by a Cobra helicopter thanks to Buzzer, who manages to race off and warn Cobra in time. And despite the messy situation, Law and the others impress Hawk enough to earn official spots on the GI Joe team. So, not a bad start for the new recruits. One more issue worth mentioning is in the pages of the IDW comics, wherein Law & Order actually have a solo featured adventure where MP and K9 take on a Cobra squad composed of a Techno Viper, a Toxo Viper, and a couple of Night Vipers in the bowels of the GI Joe headquarters, the Pit. As the story goes, Law and Order successfully stop them from unleashing some VX-21 nerve gas on the unsuspecting Joes. Okay, well actually, before they're dispatched, the Cobras do manage to unleash the gas, but Law is able to keep himself and Order alive with the enemy's airtight helmets, and is successful in dispersing said gas into the sky by activating the Pit's exhaust fans. Now, while both the cartoons and the comics give us pretty entertaining portrayals of Law & Order, at the end of the day, at least for me, it was all about the toy, the first GI Joe action figure named Chris. And over the years, while he may have not reached the same heights of popularity as the original dog handler Mutt, I don't think Law did pretty bad for himself on the action figure front, starting with the very first one, who actually had another interesting detail about it that every Joe fan, not just the ones named Chris, can appreciate, and that would be his head sculpt, which was modeled after a real person, Mr. Kirk Bozigian, who was the GI Joe product manager and one of the key marketing minds behind the success of the line at Hasbro during the 1980s. So yeah, if anyone deserved to have a GI Joe modeled after him, it definitely would have been Mr. Bozigian. Apart from that though, some other interesting bits I found online from the notes of creators Ron Rudat and Mark Pennington was that initially, Law wasn't even named Chris. His original name was Wolfgang J. Herrera, which I guess was the reason why he was Hispanic in the movie. Oh, and his original codename was Riverboat. Yeah, I can't explain that one. And finally, the original idea for Law was that of a more casual MP, a rebel of sort. You know, the type who would have the Beach Boys plastered on his bright red shirt, which thankfully they ultimately left off. Hey, don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of the Beach Boys. I just love pet sounds. Rest in peace, Brian Wilson. So with once again all that being said, before the original A Real American Hero toy line ended in 1994, we got two more versions of Law. Unfortunately though, without his furry pal Order. The first was a straight up green and tan recolor of the OG figure in 1990, now as part of the Sonic Fighters sub-team, and as such, traded in poor order for a whole plethora of weapons and a ginormous backpack. Like, it was so big, I think you could fit an entire dog in there. Okay, sorry. Anyway, in 1993, we got a brand new sculpted design for Law as part of the Battle Corps team, fully armored up from head to toe, making him look more like a futuristic soldier than a military police officer. But hey, it was a new take and looked cool, I guess, but unfortunately, still no dog. We would have to wait years for Order to finally make his return in a rather unspectacular way. In the early 2000s, GI Joe Toys made a surprise comeback with a new 25th anniversary line, which featured newly sculpted and articulated versions of our favorite 80s Joes like Barbecue, Bazooka, and Shipwreck. But unfortunately, no Law. There was a glimmer of hope though in 2009 when Law was announced to be part of a special movie-themed 5-pack. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a lazy attempt for a quick buck on the part of Hasbro, as the 5-pack consisted of a bunch of similarly uniformed Joes sporting the same generic desert camo. The only real indicator that this new dude was supposed to be Law was that he came with a dog. So, yay? Order was back. But unlike his updated master, this Order was practically the same pack-in accessory from the original release, right down to his comically oversized collar and leash. Now, Return of the Dog aside, this was definitely not gonna cut it for me. So I decided to take things into my own hands and make my own updated version of Law. This was my very first attempt at a custom-made GI Joe figure, and I thought I did a fairly good job if I do say so myself. But ultimately, it was weighed, measured, and found wanting. Yeah, still not good enough. Fortunately though, I didn't have to wait too long before Hasbro finally gave me what I was waiting for. Sorta. An official modern take on Law and Order as part of the 30th anniversary toy line. Who would have thought that that little cameo he made in the Renegade series would earn Law arguably one of the best plastic renditions of the MP? I mean, yeah, it wasn't exactly the classic Law and Order, but I'd argue that what we got was even better. Gone was the tacky colored uniform, replaced with a more realistic, predominantly dark blue ensemble. And like most of the other figures released at this time, he was also given a whole slew of accessories. Removable vest, knee pads, helmet with a face shield, as well as a number of weapons, a couple of pistols, with one featuring a detachable suppressor, a shotgun, and assault rifle. And if that wasn't enough, he also had a tonfa and handcuffs to boot. Oh, and even his trusty partner Order got a new update with an articulated head and protective vest. This was all any fan of Law & Order could really ask for in a modern update. And if this was the last version I would ever get, I'd be more than content. But as it turns out, it wouldn't be the last. So what other version could top this one? Well, I got my first answer in 2016. By this time, Hasbro had stopped making GI Joes for retail, but thanks to the GI Joe Collectors Club, the Joe line wasn't completely dead. Just mostly dead. So for those willing to spend a little more and make an annual monetary commitment, the club had a figure subscription service where they released new Joe figures every year to help fill in any gaps left by Hasbro in our collections. Gaps like a classic red and blue deco for Law & Order. Yup, thanks to the Collectors Club, I finally got what I was waiting for almost a decade. But that wasn't the end of it, as while I did have to wait a little while longer, Law & Order would eventually also make their debut in the larger 6-inch classified line in 2025. Full disclosure, I'm still waiting for mine to arrive, but he's coming. Of course, we had to wait until after Hasbro gave us a classified Barbecue, Bazooka, and Shipwreck, but whatever. Classified Law & Order does exist, and he looks glorious. With enough reverence to the original design, but just muting the colors down a tad bit for more modern realism. And looking a hella lot better than my friend's Joe's. Oh, and in a semi-related note, I do think it's worth mentioning that sometime in the 90s, well after I was done collecting Joes for the time being, Hasbro actually released another Joe named Chris. And as hard as it was to believe, he managed to sport an even tackier uniform, if you could even call it that. Slightly cool looking Cyclops visor and an actual inflatable raft accessory aside, this guy looked like he just stepped out of an American football locker room with his maroon top and bright yellow football trousers. I mean, the guy's even wearing what I'm guessing are football cleats? Not the smartest thing to wear on an inflatable raft if you ask me. Actually, their yellow and purple color kinda make them look like a pair of Magic Johnson themed Converse weapons from the 80s. Anyway, I give you the new Navy SEAL, Christopher Groen, aka Tracker, who was actually unceremoniously killed off in the Devil's Due GI Joe comics. So I guess you could say that this guy stopped growing.
Oh, Hasbro, why do you have to go and make things so complicated? If you ask me, it's pretty simple. The only true Chris we need in G.I. Joe is Chris Levine, aka Law, and his dog Order. The year was 1987, and you could say that heading into year 6, the G.I. Joe Real American Hero toy line was doing
pretty good.
And it wasn't just the toys. The Marvel Comics had just crossed the 50th issue mark and was still going strong. And the cartoon, well, had the Joes supposedly heading into the big screen with their first ever full-length animated movie. But despite things coming up roses on all fronts, it was just business as usual for Hasbro. And with a new year basically meant new toys to create and sell to the kiddies. The 1987 batch of Joes were pretty much as expected, with more colorful characters to add on both the Joe and Cobra factions. We got a brand new Paratrooper with a bright red deco to, make him easier for the Cobras to shoot out of the air. A Joe who likened himself to a cowboy, but instead of 6 shooters, had a pair of missiles strapped to his back. A couple of baddies dressed up as a crocodile and a bird. A bright green Shrink with radar dishes, just to name a few. And we also got a new ninja with a twist. See, by this time, thanks to the popularity of Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, for better or worse, ninjas had become quite the fixture in G.I. Joe lore. Well, at least in the comics. And Hasbro must have started to take notice of the missed potential earnings on the toy aisle, given that the last ninja figure they released, the second version of Snake Eyes, was back in 1985. So, according to their clocks, it was well due time for another ninja to be added to the ranks. But of course, it wasn't just as easy as wrapping up a new dude in some bed sheets, arming him with a sword, and calling it a day. To their credit, Hasbro knew that any new ninja had to be different. Had to have something that would make him stand apart from the already established Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. And for that, they decided to make their new ninja into something that wasn't very common in the G.I. Joe universe. A woman. To be fair, as far as females go, even if they were definitely in the minority, this was a boys' toy line and boys didn't play with girl action figures. Ew. Up to this point, Hasbro had given us at least one new female character a year. The OG Joe Scarlett started it off in 1982, and in 1983, Hasbro got us covered with CoverGirl. In 84, the bad guys got their first bad girl in the Baroness. Another lady debuted in 1985 in Lady J, and finally in 1986, the first female dreadnought looking pretty in pink, Zarana. 5 years. 5 females, and all of them well developed. And by that, I mean their personalities, not their... never mind. And so, for 1987, we have Jinx, the new female ninja. Now, as far as ninjas go, visually, Jinx didn't stray far off from the traditional look, although her action figure artwork did show off some unique elements to her design. First and foremost was her uniform, which was a little extra puffy at the ends of the sleeves and pant legs, giving off a sorta jammy time vibe. And staying with her pant legs, her footwear wasn't the traditional ninja tabi boots either, looking more like kung fu slippers. Her hooded mask also looked a little extra pointy. And finally, her weaponry. While twin katana blades are visibly stored on her back, her main weapon of choice appeared to be a bow staff ending with an intricately designed blade on each side, looking like a very fancy twin naginata or polearm. It's not really based on any real-world ninja weapons that I know, but she looked really good wielding it. As was par for the course back then, for most female figures, Jinx's actual toy didn't look quite as good as her card art, but that didn't stop me from rushing out and adding my first female ninja to the collection. Besides, her manicured nails were a nice touch. Anyway, Jinx's file card states that while she was born in the USA, she studied and competed in 3 forms of martial arts, and it was only later in life, during a vacation to Japan, that Jinx discovered that her family had been ninjas for generations, and she was officially initiated into the clan. And while it wasn't explicitly stated, we all know what clan that was, and pretty soon, she was recruited by Snake Eyes to join GI Joe, and the rest, as they say, is history. But visual appearance and file card aside, I guess the most obvious elephant in the room when it comes to Jinx is, what's up with the name? I mean, after such cool and sleek names like Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, Jinx just sounds, well, a little meh. The term for a person or thing that brings bad luck doesn't sound that ninja-y, does it? But if you really try to hash it out, I guess it could work if you see it as bad luck that Jinx brings upon her enemies, working in her favor, confusing them, causing unexpected outcomes, and giving her an edge in unpredictable combat situations. It's a misdirect, with Jinx's so-called curse actually being her greatest strength. Either way though, while I don't think it's as catchy as her fellow ninjas, Jinx is still a short, punchy, and memorable name. Perfect for a ninja with an edge of mystery and mischief. Anyway, after the toy aisles, Jinx made her official debut in the cartoons in a pretty big way, as one of the new characters introduced in the GI Joe full-length animated movie released straight to video. See, while GI Joe the movie was originally slated for a theatrical release, the poor financial performances of the Transformers and My Little Pony movies gave Hasbro cold feet, and they decided to give the Joe movie a more modest direct-to-video approach. Oh well, at least this turn of events ended up saving the life of Duke. Another story for another time. But as far as this story goes, Jinx was a featured character in the movie along with her fellow 1987 wave mates, Falcon, Chuckles, Tunnel Rat, Law and his dog Order, and an additional Joe seemingly made for the movie, Big Lob. And together, they formed a group of fresh new recruits that their drill instructor Beachhead christens as the Rawhides. Anyway, as a means of properly introducing them, each Rawhide gets their unique training session with Beachhead, wherein they all one-up the Masked Ranger, completing their specific challenges in unique and often humorous ways. In Jinx's case, she spars one-on-one with Beachhead, wherein he initially easily dispatches her, until she reveals her special skill of fighting, Blindfolded, a unique combat style taught to her by her blind ninja master, which she also uses to defeat her main adversary in the movie's finale, the venomous, nail-wielding Pythona. Oh, and she's also apparently paired up romantically with fellow Rawhide and central movie character, the Green Beret, Falcon. But yeah, that's never really explored past a loving kiss at the end of the movie. Unfortunately, the 1987 movie would spell the end of animated Jinx for the time being, as the original Sunbow cartoon was cancelled soon after, and when the new Deke series debuted a few years later, they had a new batch of Joes to push, and so Jinx and company were all but forgotten. How's that for bad luck? Fortunately though, we didn't have to wait long before Jinx would make her debut in the Marvel Comics. She is introduced in the 59th issue as the apprentice of the Blind Ninja Master, alluded to in the movie, the Blind Master. Aside from that, it is revealed that Jinx is the second cousin of Storm Shadow, a relationship that will be revisited in other iterations of Jinx. Anyway, her first assignment is to help train Cobra Commander's son, Billy Kessler, who is recovering from surviving a fiery car explosion. Man, it's a good thing she eventually switched her uniform's colors to red. Yikes. Anyway, and together they both join a secret ninja team led by Snake Eyes in an unauthorized mission to rescue the Joe Stalker, Snowdrop, and Quick Kick from a Barovian gulag. As an aside, I know while it's Storm Shadow's thing, but for a night mission, you'd think Jinx and Billy would have worn something darker. Eventually, despite her toy not being released under the subline, Jinx, thankfully now in her signature red uniform, is thrown in as a member of Ninja Force. And later on, she and her fellow Ninja Force teammates, Shabang and Nunchuck, set up a new training center in Spanish Harlem before the original Marvel series ends. Jinx's comic adventures do carry over into the Devil's Due series, which originally was meant to be a continuation of the Marvel story that ended with the GI Joe team being decommissioned. So during the time when the GI Joe team was non-existent, Jinx spent her days in Tokyo using her ninja skills, working as a bounty hunter alongside fellow former Joe and Samurai, Budo, who at this point was apparently her lover. Cause, you know, we agents gotta stick together. And no, I don't mean stick that way. Ew. Eventually, Jinx rejoins GI Joe once the team is reinstated, now sporting a new cutting-edge, all-black uniform with a zipper running straight down her face. Yeah. In the end though, all this doesn't really matter because once the GI Joe comics license went over to IDW, they hired the OG writer and GI Joe godfather Larry Hama to continue his Marvel series. And so the leather-clad GI Joe former bounty hunter slash Budo lovin' Jinx becomes non-canon. But aside from continuing the original Marvel story, IDW did create their own unique G.I. Joe universe, where Jinx played a rather short-lived but extremely memorable and tragic part. In one of the best G.I. Joe series ever written in my opinion, Cobra, the G.I. Joe undercover agent and fellow 87er and Rawhide Chuckles is given the assignment of going deep undercover to join the ranks of the enemy. Jinx is assigned to be his handler and only real contact with the outside world. And eventually this close association turns romantic. Unfortunately though, Team Jinx, or is that Jinkles, is short-lived as Jinx is captured by Cobra and Chuckles, well, he is forced to execute her in order to maintain his cover. It's a pretty cruel way for Jinx to go, but her death serves as the driving force for Chuckles to do, spoiler, this. So at the very least, this Jinx was avenged. And while that pretty much was the end of Jinx for now in the comics, we're not quite done with Jinx in the cartoons, as despite her unfortunately aborted role in the Sunbow series, another version of Jinx made a pretty significant appearance in the 2010 series G.I. Joe Renegades. And while the premise of this show was a bit of a departure from the usual G.I. Joe fare, in other words, less military and more A-teamy, a more traditional take on ninja and the Arashikage clan is featured in the show, which includes Jinx, who has a similar origin story to what we already know, with a few key differences. But before I get to those differences, I'd like to mention how much of a huge difference you can make in helping me and my channel out with just a single click to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. It would really mean a lot. Oh! Just like it would mean a lot for me to hear from all of you. What do you think about Jinx? Are you a fan of the first female ninja of G.I. Joe? Let me know in the comments below and tell me your story. So, Renegade's Jinx is introduced as Snake Eyes' young and quite angsty apprentice with a boatload of baggage. See, before she was Snake Eyes' apprentice, this Jinx happened to be the daughter of the leader of the Arashikage clan, the Hard Master. And while the Arashikage clan started off as a mercenary band of ninjas, seeing the negative effect such a lifestyle had on his young daughter, and being inspired by the honor-bound Snake Eyes, the Hard Master decided to change the direction of the clan to more honorable pursuits, and gets killed for it. Long story short, Snake Eyes is blamed for the death and runs away with Jinx, chased by the vengeful Storm Shadow, who kinda looks like he worked at a diner, and was actually the one who killed the Hard Master. Accidentally, he wanted to kill Snake Eyes. Whew. Yeah, it's a convoluted ninja's tale. But all you gotta know is that eventually the truth about the Hard Master's death is revealed. A conflicted Storm Shadow skedaddles, and Jinx, now a cyber ninja, takes over as the head of the Arashikage clan with a brand new spanking high-tech suit, complete with laser ropes, laser shurikens, and of course, laser sword. Given to her by Destro, who hired her to assassinate Cobra Commander. Yeah, Renegade's Jinx definitely wasn't your typical Jinx, but she was still a pretty cool character in my book. The final version of Jinx we would see would be the live-action one from the movie G.I. Joe Retaliation, played by the French actress Elodie Yung, who is also known for playing the highly trained assassin Elektra from the Netflix Daredevil series. But anyway, live-action Jinx thankfully doesn't really stray far off from what we know of the classic Jinx as well. In the movie, she still is Storm Shadow's cousin, she's still the apprentice of Snake Eyes, and she is trained by the Blind Master. And while I wouldn't say that she played a pivotal role in the movie, she did star in what was probably the key action sequence, wherein she and Snake Eyes battled the Red Ninjas on the side of a mountain. Anyway, even if her role in the movie was rather small, I think it ultimately did the Jinx character a lot more good, as I'm pretty sure it's the main reason why we got our first modern action figures of Jinx, since the original one was released in 1987. Okay, fine. We did get a couple of odd releases between the end of the Real American Hero toys and the start of the 25th anniversary line, a period I'd like to refer to as the Dark Ages. The original Jinx figure was repainted in an odd Battle Cat looking deco, green with yellow stripes, and released as part of an exclusive Tiger Force 5-pack for Toys R Us stores in 2003. It was also repainted in blue and released as a new Cobra character named Vipra. And then, as part of 2004's Valor vs. Venom line, a newly designed Agent Jinx was released. It wasn't as cool as the original in my opinion, but pretty decent. At least this time she didn't look like she was headed for a slumber party. Oh, and in case you were wondering why the Agent was added to her name, well, it was because at some point Hasbro let their trademark to the name Jinx lapse, and so Agent Jinx would have to do. Unfortunately, Jinx was left out of the whole 25th anniversary revival, and as such, I actually resorted to doing my own custom, one I am most proud of. I thought the Marion Ravenwood figure from a really obscure Indiana Jones line with her voluminous sleeves and pants would make a pretty good base for Jinx. Now, while the arms were pretty good enough, her legs had virtually no articulation points. Anyway, I figured the only real important part was the bottom section from below the knees, and so I just put 2 and 2 together, lopped off the lower legs, and attached them to another Joe's more articulated upper legs. Add a little epoxy putty to smoothen off the connection, and problem solved. Her hooded head was actually a Cobra scuba diver head. I added more epoxy to the top to make it more like a cloth hood, and I literally just doodled on her dragon emblem on her chest and the lashes on her eyes to make her look more feminine using a permanent sign pen. And finally, the black trimmings are just bits and pieces of black plastic that I shaved off and glued from various discarded webbing odds and ends. Turned out pretty good if I don't say so myself. Anyway, like I said, thanks to Jinx's minor role in Retaliation, we got not one, but 2 2012 SDCC exclusive modern Jinx action figures. Or to be more specific about it, Kim Arashikage figures, cause, you know, trademark lapse and all. But for all intents and purposes, this was Jinx, a traditional looking red Jinx, and a more generic white unmasked version. I mean, did we really need a white mask for that one? Anyway, I know what you're probably all thinking. SDC 2012, but didn't Retaliation come out in 2013? Yeah, well, given how long the toy production process takes from design to tooling, I'm willing to bet that the molds used for both SDCC exclusives were originally made for the official Retaliation Jinx, which we did get in 2013. Essentially the same figure painted in yellow and black, which is actually how she looked in the film. I guess so she could stand out fighting against all those red ninjas. Oh, and the same mold was also painted blue and released by the GI Joe Collectors Club as Vipra for their subscription service. And they also released a modern version of Tiger Force Jinx and Valor vs. Venom Agent Jinx. So I'm pretty sure you've got all your 1/18th scale Jinxes covered. But if your jam is for something bigger in that 1/12 6-inch scale, well, you're in luck. As in 2024, Kim Jinx Arashikage made her 6-inch debut in the GI Joe Classified line. And I'll admit, initially I wasn't big on this modernized take on Jinx. I mean, granted she did actually look more formidable and battle-ready with the exposed arms and less baggy outfit. The whole arm tattoo thing wasn't really my cup of tea. I figured I had enough EQ to hold out for an inevitable retro version. But I was wrong, and I'm not regretting my decision. While I'll admit that the masked head looks rather bland and uninspired, her unmasked head and overall look has grown on me. Plus, even if it's not my preferred display choice, I do appreciate the inclusion of a blindfold as a callback to her training under the Blind Master. May he rest in peace. The year was 1987, and for a preteen like me, it was pretty much business as usual. I was still all about the toys and eagerly looking forward to the new batch of Joe and Cobra characters the year had in store. So when I finally got my hands on my very first figure that year, the awesome battle-armored Cobra Commander, I did what any kid would do before even ripping open his plastic prison. I flipped it over to check out who else was coming. Actually, it was a whole lot more of coming soon. Yeah, I guess it must have been an early release. But even with nearly half the figures still shrouded in mystery, there was plenty of new Joe goodness to feast my eyes on. Now, if you've seen my past videos, you probably know what comes next. I usually zero in on one particular cool-looking figure, the one that instantly becomes my favorite of the wave. And yes, that did happen. But this video isn't about the military police officer Law and his dog Order. You can check that video out later. I'll place a link in the description below. Instead, it's actually about the Joe that didn't grab my attention back then. A character I totally overlooked. That Joe was none other than the Green Beret himself, Falcon. Now I know what you're thinking, how could I overlook such a cool looking dude like Falcon? Well, yes, in hindsight I agree, he did kinda look cool, but next to a red bearded dude with the word survival emblazoned on his chest, or a sinister looking fellow with some sort of colorful round shield kinda thing, or a guy running into battle decked out in a flower powered shirt, a traditional looking soldier dressed in all green camo just looked, I don't know, ordinary. Regardless of my first impression though, for one reason or another, Falcon ended up being one of the first 87 Joes I got my hands on. But even then, he didn't really blow me away. To me, he just felt like a second-rate Flint. I mean, he also carried a shotgun, though to be fair, it was a cooler looking shotgun. And his other accessory, a backpack with a radio antenna and a knife that you could slot into the side, was also pretty badass. That being said, his original designation as a Green Beret basically flew over my 11-year-old head, and it was completely lost on me as to why his addition to the Joe team was actually a big deal. See, for those not in the know, my younger self included, the Green Berets are a special group of elite US Army soldiers trained to do things that most regular troops aren't. Officially, they're called the US Army Special Forces, and they get their nickname from the distinctive green berets that they wear. But it's not just about the headgear. What makes them stand out is what they're trained to do. Sure, they're highly skilled fighters, but they're also experts at teaching, training, and solving complex problems in dangerous and unpredictable environments overseas. Their main specialties include helping local resistance fighters battle hostile regimes or invaders, training friendly foreign armies so that they can defend themselves, conducting fast, precise attacks on high-value targets, hunting down terrorists and stopping attacks before they happened, sneaking behind enemy lines to gather intelligence. And beyond all that, they also take on missions like rescuing hostages, tracking missing persons, stopping drug traffickers, and even doing humanitarian work like clearing landmines or providing aid after disasters. This was all neatly summed up and simplified in the flavored text of Falcon's file card, which also gave a good idea of just how cool of a character Falcon actually was. Green Berets are specialists in training and leading native insurgents. Native insurgents are usually primitive tribal people who respond to two types of leadership. You can bully and overwhelm them with superior firepower and technology, or you can bite the head off a snake, chug-a-lug the local beverage, and yell, "Follow me!" Falcon is a snake biter if I ever saw one. Anyway, Falcon's Green Beret's specialty of operating in foreign lands would come into play in the original Marvel comics, as he is utilized and survives missions in both Sierra Gordo and Trucial Abysmia, where other allies and Joes, unfortunately, die. In Sierra Gordo, Falcon witnesses the deaths of several original members of the October Guard, which is the Russian equivalent of GI Joe. But it's in Trucial Abysmia where the proverbial shit really hits the fan, as Falcon is part of a Joe squad captured by Cobra and dumped into a pit in the desert where they are mercilessly gunned down by an overzealous Saw Viper. While the initial hail of bullets takes out the OG medic Doc along with Joe's Crankcase, Heavy Metal, and Thunder, Falcon's quick action of momentarily taking out the Saw Viper with an expertly thrown knife allows him and the rest of the Joes to escape by commandeering a Cobra Rage tank, which is then blown up, killing even more Joes, Crazy Legs, Breaker, and Quick Kick, leaving Duke, Cross Country, apparently having your vehicle still on retail is a great ass saver, and Falcon as the only survivors who are finally spared, with the Saw Viper being ordered to stand down. See, here's the thing. Upon hearing of the Joe's initial capture, fearing severe retaliation, Cobra Commander quickly orders his men to get rid of them, as in, let them go, to which his men, and particularly the Saw Viper, misconstrued into, well, kill them all. Oopsie. So anyway, yeah, there definitely was more to Falcon than just looking like the second coming of Flint. And it wasn't long before that snake-biting Green Beret was a favorite in my collection. Which would be a good thing because apparently, Hasbro too had big plans for their brand new Green Beret. See, by the mid-80s, Hasbro was pretty much riding high with the success of both G.I. Joe and Transformers. So much so that they felt that the time was right to level up both properties by giving each of them their very first full-length movie. And despite both lines being rather different, I mean, one being about real American heroes and the other robots in disguise, both movies sort of had similar formulas. While yes, both movies kind of expanded and opened up their respective universes, their main objectives as always was to sell more toys, and more specifically, sell new toys to the kiddies. And so with that in mind, these movies introduced a new cast of colorful characters. But more than that, each featured a specific new central character to lead the way. So the Transformers had the fiery young Autobot Cavalier Hot Rod, and G.I. Joe would have Falcon. And I would love to have all of you as friends of the Toyshelf. Yeah, I know everyone's doing it, but if you've been enjoying my stuff and would like some extra perks, like early access and collection tours, reviews, and stories on other toy properties, why not give my channel membership a try? For a teeny tiny amount, you'll get all that, plus my ever-living gratitude. All you gotta do is click on that join button on my channel homepage, and that's it. But as always, any way you choose to help, like liking, sharing, commenting, and giving a sub, will be greatly appreciated. So, thank you. Anyway, as per his status as the new star of the G.I. Joe movie, Hasbro spared no expense, hiring actor Don Johnson, who at the time was best known as arguably the definition of cool on the TV screen, playing Detective James Sonny Crockett in the show Miami Vice, to voice Falcon, who is introduced in the movie as part of a group of new recruits nicknamed the Rawhides. And right out of the gate, it's quickly established that Falcon is kind of, well, a f***up. He is literally absent when the Rawhides make their very first official roll call in the movie, as he is busy giving a civilian named Heather an unauthorized tour of the facility where the captured Cobra Emperor Serpentor is being held prisoner. And in the process of impressing his lady friend, he also nearly takes off Duke's head with a laser blast. Man, talk about lightning reflexes. Too bad not fast enough for what's to come later on. Anyway, Heather turns out to be the dreadnought Zarana in disguise, who before being escorted off the base is able to gather vital information to be used later on by the bad guys to rescue their imprisoned emperor. But don't worry, kiddies, the very capable Green Beret Falcon is assigned to be the very first line of defense monitoring the perimeter of Serpentor's prison, so all's good. That is, until Falcon decides to abandon his post, so he can do some butt slapping and kiss stealing with fellow Rawhide Jinx, who, Heather aside, is apparently Falcon's latest crush. And so, with Falcon a little preoccupied, no one is around to sound the alarm when the Dreadnoks, along with Cobra Law agents, the venomous Pythona, and monstrous Nemesis Enforcer, make their move and infiltrate the prison. And despite the best efforts of Joe Bros, Alpine, and Bazooka, and the bare-chested tattooed Cajun Marine Gung Ho, Serpentor is freed, and the three Joes end up seriously injured. Hey, it could have been worse. Just ask Brawn, Prowl, Ironhide, and Ratchet. Anyway, this proves to be the final straw for Falcon, and General Hawk has him court-martialed. And during his trial, we get another juicy revelation. In an effort to sway the court towards a lighter sentence, Duke reveals that Falcon is his dun-dun-dun half-brother. Actually, in earlier drafts, Falcon was supposed to be Hawk's son, or brother, but whatever. They were the ones who were supposed to be related, which would explain the similar Birds of Prey themed codenames. But in the end, the writers ultimately went with Duke, whom Falcon is forever thankful to for stepping in to defend him. Just kidding. During a court recess, instead of saying thanks, he flat out tells Duke to piss off and get out of his life. Like I said, a-hole. Which is weird given that the Green Berets were supposed to be the best of the best in terms of skill and character. How the hell did this guy get in? Still, despite Falcon's ingratitude, Duke's plea works. Sorta. Instead of getting kicked out of the Joes entirely, Falcon is sentenced to the Slaughterhouse. Now, as ominous as that sounds, in the GI Joe universe, the Slaughterhouse is not the place where he gets to stay up all night with an awesome 80s band, nor is it where Falcon is put out of his misery and chopped up for some juicy steaks. Okay, let's just forget I made that rather gross cannibalistic reference, shall we? No, in this case, the Slaughterhouse is Sergeant Slaughter's personal home / training camp located in the middle of nowhere. Falcon is literally kicked out of a Tomahawk helicopter and left to parachute to his next destination, where he meets the Renegades, Sergeant Slaughter's personal crew composed of ex-footballer Red Dog, ex-Viper Mercer, and ex-circus performer Taurus. See the trend there? Anyway, after a rather warm welcome by the Renegades, Sergeant Slaughter makes his grand entrance, setting the disease at ease. So it doesn't take long before Falcon acclimates to his new situation and slowly but surely earns the Renegades and Slaughter's respect. And I guess the writers were hoping our respect as well. So this is sort of where the whole redemptive arc of the Green Beret begins. After a good number of training sessions, Falcon and the Renegades get their first assignment of infiltrating a Cobra Terrordrome to gather information. And while Falcon is captured, he hangs on long enough through an intense Serpentor slapfest, providing a distraction enabling Slaughter and his Renegades to rig the drome to blow. Of course, they rescue Falcon before skedaddling. Which leads us to the scene. Okay, but first, the battle, where Cobra retaliates and takes the Joes head-on in their home court, which on a normal day would sound like a fool's errand. But this time around, the snakes are backed up by the organic, viney, squirty, and wormy forces of Cobra la 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 la. Anyway, all this is done to recover the new MacGuffin of the movie, the Broadcast Energy Transmitter, or BET for short. We'll get back to that contraption a little later on. All you gotta know is that this battle culminates in a showdown between Serpentor and Falcon, who would've and should've gotten a venomous snake spear jammed into his heart if it weren't for Duke, who valiantly gets in the way and takes the spear, meant for Falcon, into his own chest. So much for lightning-quick laser dodging reflexes. Too slow. Anyway, so there's a lot to unpack with this scene, which was obviously meant to kick Falcon's redemption arc into overdrive. I mean, who wouldn't make a resolve to get their act together and be a credit to their country after seeing their half-brother take the proverbial snake bullet for him and die? Because, make no mistake about it, Duke died. Or at least that was the game plan from the get-go. Fortunately for the 6'2" eyes of blue first sergeant, it was not his day to meet his maker, thanks to a certain optimistic truck robot who kicked the bucket the previous year. See, in 1986, the Transformers movie was released, with, as I mentioned earlier, the same game plan, introducing new characters to sell more toys, which included a new leader. And so, to make way for the new guy, they had to get rid of the old guy, and so Optimus Prime was, how can I say this, made one with the Matrix, which then sent children into hysterics and angry parents calling for Hasbro's head. And so, realizing that they had royally screwed the pooch on that one, immediately backtracked their plans to kill Duke and just conveniently have him slip into a coma and wake up at the end of the movie off screen. So, yay! But that wasn't the end of the story. It gets better. See, originally the GI Joe movie was supposed to be released before the Transformers one, but was delayed due to production issues. I heard from a friend of a friend that Don Johnson had issues getting out of Miami or something. But yeah, so imagine if things worked out as planned. Duke would have died before Prime, and I mean, I'm a huge fan of Duke, but even I'll concede that his death wouldn't have generated half as much vitriol as Prime, so I'm guessing he would have stayed dead. Anyway, boy, did we go off on a tangent there. So Duke died, slips into a coma, and Falcon, well, he changes his ways and leads the Joes straight into the heart of Cobra la 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 la, where Falcon has his rematch with Serpentor, and thanks to the help of another snake, no, like a literal snake who was formerly Cobra Commander, the Green Beret ultimately gets the best of the Cobra Emperor by illustrating Edna Mode's point that capes are dangerous liabilities.
No kicks!
But taking out the Cobra Emperor, nor poking the actual main Cobra Law baddie Golobulus in the eye with a stick wouldn't be Falcon's greatest accomplishment. Nope, he does a whole lot more. Remember the BET? Well, Cobra La 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 didn't steal it in order to broadcast basic cable that targeted Black American audiences. No, they needed the BET to incubate a bunch of fungozoid seed pods in space and cause them to mature and shower the Earth with mutative spores to turn Earthlings into degenerative monsters. I don't know, man. Spores in space? I mean, I'm not a scientist, but wouldn't re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere basically cause those spores to burn up? But anyway, the Joes are unable to stop the pods from hatching and the spores are on their way until the quick-thinking Falcon amps up the BET to basically fry all the spores in space and cause the BET itself to overload and, well, blow up Cobra La 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 La. So the Joes win the day and Falcon also finally gets his kiss with Jinx. So great job, Falcon. And with the movie done, GI Joe was ready to move on to their next animated chapter with their new guy, Falcon, leading the way. At least that was the plan. Unfortunately, after the Transformers movie apparently bombed, Hasbro got cold feet with GI Joe and ended up releasing their movie straight to video, and the original cartoon series was cancelled soon after. And so we would have to wait a little bit longer before we would see Falcon in action again, because fortunately, unlike his fellow Rawhides, Falcon would return. Unfortunately, it would be in the next GI Joe cartoon series produced by Dick, which is a whole nother monstrosity in itself that many GI Joe fans refuse to acknowledge ever existed. But I mean, Falcon does show up, so I have to mention it. In the two-part episode, The Greatest Evil, the Joes find themselves teaming up with Cobra to battle, well, the greatest evil, the drug dealer named The Headman, who is flooding the streets with this new and highly addictive drug called Spark. And given the problem at hand, it would make perfect sense to have a Joe who specializes in stopping drug traffickers like, the Green Beret Falcon on board. Unfortunately, Falcon apparently is the drug addict in the story. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. I guess Jinx was bad luck for the dude. And when his dirty little secret is discovered, Duke immediately kicks his own brother out of the team. I guess getting struck in the heart by a snake spear was Duke's limit when it came to being patient with his little bro. Anyway, ultimately, Falcon manages another mini redemption arc, finding the Headman's super secret drug lair and leading both Joe and Cobra forces to it, and tackling the Headman himself, causing the dude to accidentally overdose on his own drug, killing him. That's right, Headman actually dies. No coma here. And at the end of the day, Falcon reconciles with his brother and goes into rehab with a new girl. And so all is good. Anyway, one thing worth noting in this appearance is that Falcon is sporting a new look. While he still has his signature green beret, he's now wearing a new predominantly gray camouflage ensemble, which is reflective of his new action figure that was out at the time of this cartoon. The Sonic Fighting Falcon, who was basically the OG figure painted up in gray with a huge backpack with helicopter blades. Yeah. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Prior to this release, we also got a darker colored Falcon as part of the sub-team Night Force. Same OG figure, same OG accessories, now in black, brown, and gray. I mean, I'm guessing that the designers felt it would be sacrilegious to try and 90-fy the classic Green Beret look by throwing in some neon or sci-fi elements. So that was pretty much it for Falcon in the Real American Hero line. The next one we would get would be in 2008 as part of the modern 25th anniversary line. This new Falcon would be sold in a comic 2-pack with his Cobra La 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 buddy, Nemesis Immortal, because, trademark issues, I guess. And speaking of issues, this guy definitely had some with his face, which looked a little undersized and Asian. Fortunately, Hasbro would fix this with later releases of Falcon colored in Mad Marauder green and blue, Night Force brown and black, and if that wasn't dark enough for you, an even blacker Special Forces mission for the 50th anniversary line. Curiously though, this rather excellent mold wouldn't be released in his classic green camo. But in any case, we would get that, a classic Falcon, in a larger scale as part of the classified line in 2023. which unfortunately came with what many collectors considered to be the worst head sculpt in the line to date. I mean, look at this thing. Yeesh. It's even more unfortunate that his fellow Joe Wavemate, CoverGirl's head was seemingly sculpted by the same person. Double yeesh. I had to switch out her head with a much better looking one, calling back to her original blonde animated look. But as for Falcon, fortunately Hasbro threw us a bone by giving us a Night Force version of Falcon, along with a new partner named Quarrel, with an improved head. Well, slightly improved, but definitely better, that I just popped onto my original Falcon. And don't worry kiddies, Night Force Falcon also came with an additional helmeted head as well, so problem solved, I guess.